Hi, so this is Paul. I want to talk to you about webinars. Webinars are such a great way for coaches, consultants, therapists, counsellors, in fact any kind of business. They're a great tool to allow you to get in front of your audience. A good webinar platform will record all the video for your webinars so that you've got content that can be repurposed. You can cut it up, use it on your social media channels, Instagram, TikTok, that kind of thing. They're a great way to offer downloads, to get sign-ups. You can sell on your webinar, so you can give some free value content, tell people what you're selling. Maybe it's a course, maybe it's a product, and then at the end of the webinar you can do a pitch to lock that person into a great offer. The better webinar platforms will allow you to record a series of webinars and bundle them together and sell them as a course. Also, depending which webinar platform you use, they'll allow you to have your courses and webinars for free, or they could be tied into a payment gateway such as Stripe, so that you can actually charge for your webinars. So one thing that you can do is bundle a series of webinars together to create a training course, for example, and then you can sell the collection of webinars or the group of webinars as an entire coaching package. Of course, a key part of your webinars is your slide deck. Now, don't make the mistake that I did many years ago. I used to live in a corporate world where I used to dress in a suit and tie every day, and we had these very neat corporate templates for our presentations, so they'd have the same footer, the same header. No, they look very nice, but from slide to slide it was only the content that changed. For certain audiences those worked very well, but in online marketing, if somebody's going to be watching your presentation, you've got to keep them engaged, you've got to keep their interest. We all know that in the online world people's attention span is very, very small. So if you show people the same template every time with just the content that's changed, they're going to gradually zone out, they're going to switch off. Now, in the world of psychology, there are things called pattern interrupts, and you need to put those to good use in your presentation. And a pattern interrupt is something like a different colour, a different image. So every slide is bang, something different, bang, something different. So in that way, the user who's watching your webinar, they don't know what to expect next. With the old corporate template idea, if you've got the same background and the same footer and the same header, even if the content is really amazing, people are just going to zone out. They'll kind of expect to see what's next, and they'll start to just lose the plot. But if you've got like a bright orange slide, then a bright red slide, and a bright green slide, or a bright yellow, and different images, and you move the text around from place to place, don't always put it in the same place, that's called a pattern interrupt. And every time you put a new slide in front of your audience, they have to re-engage with it, they have to work out where everything is. Now that might sound very subtle, but it's a really important way to keep your audience engaged. But more importantly, you want to make sure that your audience is absorbing and digesting the great content that you're giving to them. So make sure your slides are colourful, they're engaging, don't have too much on each slide, break it down nicely so you can spread your webinar out. And don't forget that if you want to, at the end of the webinar, you can offer to give away your slide deck. The other thing that's really important in a webinar is the actual structure of the webinar. Now it depends on the purpose. If you're offering a sales webinar, I always think it's polite at the beginning of the webinar to signpost your audience, to let them know in advance that you're going to be making them a great offer at the end. Because I always feel it's a little bit sneaky if you watch a webinar, then right at the end of the webinar there's a big sales pitch that you weren't really expecting. I think that can be a bit cheeky. But if you set the scene up front, if you explain to your users during your introduction that you're going to be making an offer to them at the end, a really good offer, then they're kind of primed to know what to expect. So when you do your pitch at the end of the webinar, they're not going to be surprised, they're not going to be so irritated perhaps, because they know what's coming. And if your value is good throughout the webinar, then there's every reason for them to stay. Now, another thing that people often do in webinars is to keep you want to keep your audience engaged, and you want to make sure they stay to the end so they hear all your good content, but so that you can actually make that offer at the end of the webinar. A really great way to do that is during the introduction to the webinar, is to tell people that you're going to offer a really amazing special free gift at the end of the webinar. So that entices people to stay, that encourages them to stay for the full duration, because they know at the end of the webinar they're going to get a free gift. Don't tell them what the free gift is, because it might be something that doesn't interest them. So they might think, oh, I don't want that free gift because I know what it is, so they won't stay. But if you use curiosity to pique their interest and just plant that seed of interest, then people are more likely to stay to the end of the webinar. And obviously you do want to give them something of value, and it might be an ebook, it might be a template, it might be a free booking call for a consultation with you, something of that nature. Or it might be a free MP3. Maybe you're doing meditation or something like that, so you can give them a free MP3 download. Maybe you're an accounting service and you can give them like a free tax advice sheet, something like that. There's lots of ideas that you can do. But the whole idea is at the beginning of the webinar, you make the promise that you're going to give a great gift that's going to be of real use to the audience at the end of the webinar. And then sure enough, at the end of the webinar, you put a download button on your screen that allows the audience to download it. So going back to the slide deck, there are various tools you can use. I think most of us have heard of Microsoft PowerPoint. Google Slides is very good. Did you also know that you can use Canva? Canva's very good for creating slides. Now the important thing is that inside PowerPoint you can do lots of really crazy things like animations, you can slide things on the screen, all kinds of wizzy stuff, which is great for interest. However, I would say that most webinar platforms won't support that. Most webinar platforms allow you to present a PDF or PNG files, which are just image files. It's very easy to export those from your packet, from things like PowerPoint. You can export every slide as a PNG file and upload it to your webinar platform. But if you use animations and all that clever stuff, it probably isn't going to work. Now, although the webinar platform will allow you to do a screen share, so you could actually arguably do your slides with all the snazzy animations in, I don't think you should really do that. Keep it simple. The simpler things are, the easier they're going to be and the more reliable they're going to run. Because on a webinar there's a lot of moving parts, so the simpler you can keep everything, the better it's going to work. The other really important thing, of course, on the webinar is to talk about the hardware that you need. You need to have a quality microphone because the quality of your voice will help you to connect with your audience. If you've got a tinny microphone and it doesn't sound so good, you'll lose that human connection, which is so important to talk to your audience and help them feel engaged, get them to trust you, get them to like you, because they can hear the quality of your voice. So I'd recommend investing in a good light microphone, something like a Blue Yeti. There's plenty of other ones out there, but do spend some money, because invariably the microphone that's built into your PC or your webcam, although it's fine for phone calls and video calls and that kind of thing, it's probably not quite good enough to do a webinar. The next thing you need is to have a good webcam. Now, although the cameras inside computers such as Windows boxes and Apple Macs, that kind of thing, they're pretty good, but obviously they're restricted in terms of their position. I'm actually using a Logitech Brio at the moment, which is a 4 HD camera. It's really, really good. You can vary the scene size, the width of the actual visual window that you're using. It's very well recognised. The other model that they make is an HD 920. That's the model that I was using previously. It works very, very well. But again, you want to be able to film yourself in high resolution so your audience gets the best experience. Another thing that's really important that I strongly recommend is that you use an Ethernet cable to plug your computer into your router. Now, Wi-Fi is getting better and better and better, but Wi-Fi is very subject to interference, all of that kind of thing. And video streaming is very, very bandwidth intensive. If you use a hardwired Ethernet cable, you get over all the limitations. When you're running a webinar, you want to give your audience the best possible experience, so I thoroughly recommend that you get yourself a cheap, they're only about $10, something of that nature, a good quality Ethernet cable to plug your computer directly into your router. I can almost guarantee also, if you run a speed test over Wi-Fi and then run the same speed test with the Ethernet cable connected, I would expect you would see a very, very high improvement in the bandwidth. So to give your webinars the best possible chance of running smoothly, use an Ethernet cable, because that's a really worthwhile investment and it won't cost you very much money whatsoever. Of course, the key thing you need is the actual webinar platform. People use Zoom. Zoom is great because in some respects it's good that you can see your audience, but the thing is with Zoom is it's missing a lot of key webinar facilities. For example, if you want to do an automated replay, if you want to do on-demand webinars, a follow-up sequence, an evaluation form, reminder emails, all of those different things. And as I was saying earlier, if you want to group your webinars together into a course that you can put a price ticket on, then Zoom's not going to let you do that. I personally recommend Webinar Geek. It's a great platform. The technical support is excellent. It's very intuitive. It's very, very well thought out. I've been using it for quite some time. I've actually delivered probably well over 100 webinars using Webinar Geek now, and I absolutely love it. And they're improving all the time. New features, improving the quality, bug fixing is really good. Not that I've ever found many bugs, to be honest with you. But Webinar Geek, I've looked at all the different platforms. There's Webinar Jam, Easy Webinar, GoToWebinar, Blue Jeans, Demio. There's a very long list of quality products out there, but I've looked at all of them. And in terms of pricing and what you get for your money and the quality, for me, Webinar Geek is the best platform out there to use, so I would highly recommend it. You can sign up for a free subscription. I think you get 14 days for free. You can test out the features. You can even run some live webinars. So I'd recommend, if you're looking at a webinar platform, look at Webinar Geek. and I'm pretty sure you'll find it's really good. Okay, so you've got all your hardware, you've got your software, you've got your slides, you're going to do your first webinar. Now I would strongly recommend you put yourself together a checklist, because there's a lot of moving parts to a webinar and it's quite overwhelming at first. So you want a checklist that runs something like test your microphone, test your video, have a glass of water ready, I don't know, take a bathroom visit before you start the webinar because you don't want to get caught out halfway through. Do a quick check in the mirror, make sure you've got nothing on your face that shouldn't be there. Do a voice warm up. It's very important when you're talking to people that your voice is in good order, that your lips are working properly. You know, if we go to the gym, we do a warm up, and there are some voice exercises you can do. You can do a bit of Googling, but you can find there are some good voice warm ups that you can do so that you're speaking at your best in front of your audience. So that's also worthwhile doing. Every time you run your webinar, you'll probably find a little mistake that you made or something that you could have done better. Go to your checklist, put it on there. Next time you run the webinar, I would say start the webinar, well actually get your checklist out about an hour before the webinar when you're new to it. Run through the checklist, make sure everything's running smoothly. It's the old saying, isn't it? It's better to be an hour early than 5 minutes late. And in terms of time, what I always recommend we do is to actually open the doors to your webinar, so to speak. Open doors 10 minutes early. So you're not actually starting a presentation, but you're opening the webinar so that people can come in, they can see you on the screen, you can have a bit of a chat with them, introduce yourself if you want to. But start the actual presentation bang on time. Personally, I always think it's very disrespectful when you go to a webinar, you're on time, and it doesn't start, and then the presenter's going, okay, we're just going to hang on for a few more minutes for the latecomers. Why do we do that? I think that's very disrespectful. You've made the effort to be there on time, the presenter's there. Why should we be held up by latecomers? That's, you know, we all have problems in life, I respect that. People get stuck in traffic, things can happen, and they want to come to the webinar, but it's not fair on those that have turned up on time. Don't forget, people are giving you their time. Time is precious. You don't get an infinite amount of it in our lives. If you're going to stay 10 o'clock, start at 10 o'clock. Don't hang around for latecomers. If they turn up late, it's not your problem. They'll catch up. You can send them a replay later on and they can catch up on the 5 or 10 minutes that they missed at the beginning. And I'm sure they won't mind. So be sure to start on time is what I would strongly recommend. I always think at the beginning of the webinar it's a good idea to signpost, so you can do like a little agenda to say maybe a list of bullet points of the things you're going to discuss, including the offer that I was talking about earlier on. And of course, you should perhaps keep your webinar to about 45 minutes to an hour. If it's the first time people engage with you, you don't want to overrun your time. Obviously, there are going to be questions and answers. I would if you have someone else who can host the webinar with you, they could be possibly answering or fielding the questions in the background. Again, it depends on the webinar software that you have, but with Webinar Geek, which is the platform we use, any questions can be answered either in real time on the spot, or they can be emailed so that you can deal with them with an email after the event. It's obviously very important that you try and answer your audience's questions, but make sure you've got the facilities to do that. Now with Q&As, if you're finding that the same questions come up time and again, then you might find that you want to revisit your slides and address those questions, preempt them so to speak, so that on the next time you do the webinar, you kind of address those questions that frequently come up. So that's pretty much it. I think I've probably shared everything I know about webinars now in about, about 10-15 minutes or so. First time you run one can be very nerve-wracking. It's a bit like driving a car, isn't it? You've got to put your foot on the clutch, lift the handbrake off, put the indicators on, change gear, turn the steering. There's a lot to think about, but when you've done it the second time and the third time and the fourth time, you start to become very familiar with all those different things that you have to do. And when you get to your fifth or sixth webinar, I'd suggest that they'll run very smoothly, you'll feel very relaxed, you can start to really enjoy doing them. But the thing is practice as well. The first time that you're going to do a webinar, I would suggest that you do a dry run with nobody watching, or maybe get a friend or a relative to watch with you, and then they can give you some feedback. They can give you some advice on how your delivery of speech went, how your articulation went, how your appearance went, how the subject went. But always do a dry run first. Even if you don't have a camera, just stand in front of the mirror. I find a lot of people are quite uncomfortable doing that. They seem to be afraid of their own voice. And that's no surprise because it's not something we do every day. It feels very alien to us to stand in a room and speak on our own. But you get used to it. It's like everything in life. Familiarity breeds comfort. You'll get very comfortable with it. And practice makes perfect. Do it again and again and again and you'll become very polished and you'll start to have fun with it. Once you overcome the first technical hurdles and the anxiousness, the anxiety and all the things that go on there, you'll start to really have fun with it. A few little things I've learned which are quite interesting. Now I'm sure that we've all heard our voice on a recording and we realise that our voice sounds completely different, and we kind of squirm. And as you may realise, the reason for that is that when we hear our own voice, we're hearing it through the vibrations in our jaw. We're not really hearing it through the airwaves into our ear. We do have some of that as well, but we're also hearing it through the vibrations in our head. But obviously, our friends and relatives and our audience, they only ever hear you through the airwaves, and they're familiar with that voice. But when you hear yourself the first time, your voice sounds very different. So that's the first thing. The second thing, which is really interesting, and I only learned this a while ago, when you see yourself in the mirror every day, your brain, your mind becomes very familiar with the image in front of you. You've probably spent a life, looking in that mirror. You're brushing your teeth, or you're having a shave, or fetching something out of your eye. So throughout your life, you spent many times looking in the mirror. So your entire mind is very familiar with the image of you. When you see yourself on video for the first time, maybe a recording, or you're standing in front of the live camera, depending on the software, if you're watching a recording, the image is going to be the other way round. You're seeing yourself as everybody has always seen you, but for you it's quite a different experience. Your brain hasn't seen that very often, and the way that the brain communicates there's something wrong is by the feelings of anxiousness and discomfort, because although logically you can see the video and you know jolly well that it's you, but your face is the other way round, and our faces, they're not symmetric. They're not exactly the same when you flip them round. So our mind is having some real problems with this, because it sees the person on the screen, but there's something wrong because it's the other way round. So your psyche is kind of giving you that kind of little nudge of discomfort to say, here, there's something wrong here. There's something wrong. Obviously, there's nothing wrong, but it's just an image of yourself that you're not familiar with. Now, in a lot of software, things like Logitech and Webinar Geek and many other platforms, they'll have an option so that you can actually view yourself reversed. So what you see is when you're on the video, you see the mirror image of yourself, which is what you're very familiar with. The software vendors have actually latched onto the fact that if you see yourself the right way round, it's actually quite disconcerting, because when you turn your head that way, the image on the screen goes the other way, and that's quite unnerving. If you're trying to do a video and your head's moving the opposite way around, again, your mind's not used to seeing that. You're used to seeing the mirror image where if you turn your head that way, the reflection follows. It doesn't go the other way. So they give that option in software to leave it reversed, because it's much more comfortable to do the video. Anyway, that's just another little thing that's interesting, because your brain's just not used to seeing you the other way around. But believe me, when you've done video recording for quite a few times and webinars quite a few times, that part of your subconscious which is giving you those little niggly warning signs that something's quite right, eventually it gives up and goes, okay, that is you. I realise it's fine. But it's just one of those things, with familiarity, with practice, you'll get more comfortable doing them. So that's pretty much all I've got to say about webinars now. I really want to encourage you to get out there and start doing them. You can look me up if you want to find out any details, ask me any questions. I've got all my contact details here below the video. So please do get in touch, and I'll be delighted to help you. Webinars, they can be very lucrative, very successful. Once you've got your webinar running really smoothly and you're getting conversions at the end of it, you can automate them, and then you've got an automated funnel where you run your ads, you run your traffic to your webinar booking page. Your webinars run automatically, you don't have to be there. You can scale it up, and that's where you can be really successful at making money, depending on the nature of your business. Anyway, thanks again, that's Paul. See you again soon.